How you doing? Hello everybody and welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. So we have a tournament today, so at 2 p.m. EST, and I wanted to, for myself, go over the deck list, go over the deck archetypes. So we're going to be reviewing the list, lots of powerful players in here, so it should be a very jam-packed and informational video. So let's get started. It's pretty long though. So first things off, some of you may know, we do have a tournament today from Fiona Shadestar. They're doing a fundraiser, but it's also a tournament as well. 64 players. I don't know if they got all 64, but 6 rounds of Swiss top 8, best of ones. So we're going to be playing one conquest match, and then the finals are best of 3. So it's open deck list. What we're doing today is we're going to be looking through those deck lists, right? We have a list of all players' deck list and the 3 decks they're bringing, and we're just going to analyze that. There's a lot of streamers in there, a lot of great players in there, so I do think this is going to be a pretty good showcase of what the meta looks like, at least high level for now. And hopefully there'll be some decks that you might resonate with. There has to be something that you guys find interesting, some decks that you guys want to play. So I think this is just really good, and I'm personally interested as well, right? I'm going to be playing against these players, so it's also good to get a feel of the competition, things like that. But I do want to mention where it's coming from, right? So we do have this tournament here, $1,500 prize pool, though 900 is going to the charity, while top 4 is receiving the rest of the money there. So pretty interesting. The rules is all cards are allowed, and then you have to submit 3 decks, and we've already done that. And the spreadsheet is available. That's what we're using. I'll have links in the chat, links in the description, that kind of thing. And then each card can only be used once within all decks. I think this is very interesting. Definitely threw some people off, right? Where people are having like multiple Chavez's, multiple Professor X's, things like that. There's a lot of like cards that you just put in multiple decks. So definitely something you have to think about. So, and then another interesting tidbit is before each match, you and your opponent will ban one of the other decks for the match, right? So we bring 3 decks, 1 is being banned. So then you have to choose one of the remaining 2 to play into one of the remaining 2 of your opponent. So definitely some interesting decisions there, lots of thought process there. So definitely a fun one. It's not going to be best 2 out of 3 or anything like that, since that would take too long, right? So I think this is fine for what it's about. So could be a interesting tournament for sure, but that's what's going on here, and this is where we're getting the decks from. So with that out of the way, let's get into the actual the meat and potatoes, right? So we can kind of look at, I guess, some of the participants, right? A lot of good players here. Brade Cleanup, I'm playing in there. I believe D Money's playing. There's just a lot of players you should know in this tournament. So definitely should be a very high level tournament, very strong players in there. So I'm just kind of showcasing some of the people that are playing in there, and that should be exciting. So first off, I want to look at just like how much of an archetype was brought, right? Like that's going to be the first thing we're discussing. Most popular. So we brought 3 different decks, right? And most popular of the 3 was Loki. Loki was the most popular with a 43% presence. Now, I do want to say 43% presence to me is extremely low. Like, in my opinion, you can bring 3 different decks, right? So it means that like 40% of the players said, hey, Loki's a deck I want to bring. But other than that, there's just a large amount of different decks being brought, like the highest being Loki. So very interesting. That might mean that there's a pretty healthy meta, at least when it comes to competitive, because you can go to ladder and stuff, you see a lot of Lokis, but when it comes to competitive, right, people are aware that Loki's being brought, right, but then again, you can ban things, you can ban answers. So it's interesting that not even half the players would bring a Loki deck, right? Because I've definitely seen other metas where the highest played archetype, right, is over like 50%, over 60%. And the fact that you could bring 3 different decks and it's under 50 is pretty surprising to me. So definitely an interesting kind of notion there. Next up, right, it goes from 40 to 25%. So there really wasn't that much. There wasn't that much like unanimous decision in what people are bringing. There was definitely a lot of discussion and differences within the decks. We're going to go through the decks individually, but it's interesting how low presence even the most popular decks are being brought. And the fact you can bring 3 decks, I would have thought that there would be at least 1 or 2 that are reaching above 50% presence, but not the case, right? So Shuri Sharon makes sense. Miss Marvel Lockdown, right? So this is a very, well, not a very new deck, but it's a new deck because of Miss Marvel being added into this. That kind of increases the power of the lockdown. So your Professor X have that Miss Marvel +5 power to kind of make it a little bit more consistent. So there's definitely some power in that. And then we have Darkhawk, good stuff, right? This is also a Miss Marvel deck. Then we have High Evolutionary She-Hulk, Thanos Control, Destroyer, Ramp, Patriot, right? So just not that much unanimous decisions in what archetypes people are bringing. So there's a lot of variety in here, which is interesting. I do think having variety is nice. Having things that people aren't going to expect can be a plus for you. So it's always good to go with something that's a little bit different from standard. I personally did bring Loki in this deck or in this tournament. So I do think Loki is one of the strongest decks to bring, and looks like some people agree. So it is something I brought. My other 2 decks are definitely in the lower end of things. They're not that common, but I would say most people did bring something uncommon, right? I think that was a trend. Maybe they played their comfort, maybe something that they just don't think people would be able to deal with or expect. So there was a lot of people using their, or at least bringing their own style, which I love, right? So definitely interesting in terms of the archetypes, what people are bringing. In terms of anything weird coming out when we look at this, right? Like none of this is too surprising. Sarah Control, Hella, discard. I don't really, the Silk move is a little low to me. I personally thought there'd be more of this. Miss Marvel Point Slam. I actually don't know what that refers to, but maybe just like an onslaught deck. Probably an onslaught. You were just slam points. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Zabu, good cards. Someone brought negative. I respect that for sure. And then here we just have like random naming conventions. Thor Monkey, High Evolution Affliction probably means hazmat. That'd be my guess. Things like that. Only 1 person brought Loki Bounce. Wow. That's not really true. My deck is somewhat Loki Bounce, so I guess maybe just the archetype descriptions are not like super. Like you would, I guess this is probably a Loki deck, right? Is what it says, instead of just like a Loki Bounce or Loki Control or anything like that. So there's a little bit more Loki, it seems, than just the 17. Maybe a little bit, maybe more than, maybe like 20%, but yeah, definitely interesting. All right, then we have the card frequencies. I think this is also very interesting to talk about, where what are people bringing? Like what individual card is the most popular? I will say first, number 1 is not surprising. Number 2 is also not surprising to me. Even number 3 is not. Actually, none of this is surprising. But yeah, Chavez, I would say, is definitely the most popular card. It's the most ubiquitous. You can put it in everything. And if you're running 3 decks, right, with no repeats, it's hard to not have Chavez in there. So almost 90% of the players brought Chavez. Makes sense to me. And not surprising. Same thing with Jeff. Jeff is just a very flexible card. You can play it in anything. So if you just need a spot to add a card in, Jeff makes a ton of sense. And then Alioth, I'm a little surprised that it's in 70% of decks. That you would think that with the Alioth nerf, you'd see a little bit less presence, but just being able to kind of shut things down on turn 6 is just so powerful. That, yeah, Alioth in 71% of decks, actually surprising to me. Nico's not surprising. Iron Lad, Professor X being that high. I guess a lot of people are playing Miss Marvel. Where's Miss Marvel actually? Miss Marvel's up here as well, right? Yeah. So I assume if you're playing Miss Marvel, you're also playing Professor X. You can see that they have the exact same frequency. So probably like a lot of the Professor X decks are also in Miss Marvel decks. I think that makes sense. Cosmo's pretty high in my opinion. Shang-Chi has dropped a lot, right? You remember, but this is like the effect of the nerf, right, to Shang-Chi. It's lost a lot of presence. This I feel like this would be much higher without the changes they made to Shang-Chi. But I also think Shang-Chi should be in this particular frequency. It shouldn't be like every single deck needs a Shang-Chi or every single run needs a Shang-Chi. Now it's only like half of it, so a little bit lower. Blue Marvel, quite high, right? 50% essentially for Blue Marvel. I am running Blue Marvel, so kind of interesting to see. And then we can kind of go down from there. Low-key collector. These are a little bit more ubiquitous and kind of standard like tech pieces. So nothing surprising here. Only 41% playing Werewolf by Night. There's a lot of hype for Werewolf, but I do think Werewolf you have to build a deck specifically for Werewolf by Night. Or at least have it as a functioning win condition. Like it's not necessarily a good stuff card unless your cards are all on reveal. You have to kind of play around it in some circumstances. And then going down, right, Psylocke being in 35% of deck builds is kind of high, but I think if you're playing anything with ramp, it makes some sense. And then as we go down, nothing too crazy, nothing too outlandish, right? Onslaught, thanks to Miss Marvel, right, is now being played. I know this would not be the case otherwise, and nothing too surprising. Anything off here as we look? I will say Darkhawk is pretty low. Generally in tournaments, Darkhawk is a pretty popular option, but surprisingly low here. Mobius as well, only 23% of decks, so even with the Mobius adjustment back to 3 mana, that's not that powerful to warrant like large usage, right? So kind of this is kind of telling. This was my like concern, like is it enough? I do think 2 mana is too strong, but at least Mobius is seeing some play, so at least we have that going for itself, right? Like because I do think if it was still on reveal, it would see no play. So at least it's seeing some play. Then we just have some other particular use cases here. Some Patriots, some She-Hulk. Nothing too crazy. Kitty Pride is pretty low, personally, right? Kitty Pride only being at 7. 20% of decks is actually quite low. So definitely something to look into. But other than that, nothing too crazy. Mysterio bounce beast stuff is not that common. And even the Armanzola null Venom, so just pure destroy also is not that common, even though I think destroy is really good. But it looks like when it comes to competitive formats, a lot of people are not really favoring the full destroy matchup. And then we just have some discard pieces, right? Like all the cards will be next to each other. X23, right, with destroy, not that common. So yeah, definitely interesting. Negasonic, right? Negasonic is so hard. I think it's such a good card, but what decks do you play it? I know there is going to be a deck where Negasonic is brain dead OP, but we just don't have it yet. Kind of sad to see it's so down here. But other than that, Lady Deathstrike as well, pretty low. Hela, and all the people are going for the Hela deck decisions. So yeah, very, very low percentage once you get down here. And then just a couple of people playing Rescue. Someone's playing Rescue. Someone's playing Jessica Jones. Someone's playing Electra. That's cool. I like this card. Black Cat, Samurai, Phoenix Force, Hobgoblin. So just not super popular cards here at the bottom. Only one person playing Hazmat is also pretty interesting. So yeah. Anyways, that's just a look at the frequency. But now we can kind of go through the actual decks themselves and kind of analyze them in whole. So I think that's also going to be pretty interesting. So let's get there. We have to switch the if I do it, these are unviewable. So first off, right here, we do have deck 1. Do I need to make my camera a little bit smaller? I think this is generally fine here. So we have Ramp Destroy. So Destroy deck, we could tell it's not that popular. I do think Destroy decks are pretty good if played around. The only thing is like your opponents are going to know your deck list. That's the one like caveat when it comes to deck design. Your opponents are going to know what you have, so you have to make sure that you can function well. You could do a lot of good things. Here, this is a pretty simple destroy deck. There's no Deadpool. There's nothing like that, which I do kind of like. A lot of times when I see a lot of powerful destroy decks, they are running Deadpool and they just like cheese the Deadpool. The Deadpool's like 16 power and they just get a 1 power 16, right? So they're not doing anything like this. This is a little bit basic. The little twist in there is the Lady Death Strike, so you have to be aware of that in that matchup. But other than that, I think it's a pretty standard destroy list. So no death as well. So definitely just a standard list. I wouldn't be well, I wouldn't I'm not gonna say anything in terms of like being afraid or not afraid, right? Just because I tend to be wrong, you know. Universe tends to kind of laugh at me if I'm like, oh, this deck doesn't look scary, and I get blown out by it. So, you know, I'm not going to say anything like that, but definitely up to you guys whether you maybe after the tournament's over, then I can kind of say, oh, I would suggest this, but I don't know if I'm making another video about this, so you know, you might have to just do that yourself. But second list, we do have a Thanos list with Valkyrie. So this is kind of like an old ongoing Thanos list with Valkyrie as their kind of main engine. You could see in this deck there's a lot of tech cards and there's a lot of ongoing hate, right? So they're running Super Scroll and Enchantress to kind of deal with that. But in terms of like dealing with big cards, they have the Shadow King, they have the Shang-Chi, they have the Valkyrie. So this is a very heavy tech focused deck, mostly using Professor X and Daredevil to kind of win their matchup. So not a bad list here. A lot of good control tools. So if you're like trying to deal with if you're fighting or if your deck has a lot of control stuff, this could be a pretty rough match into that one. And then third is Loki, just a consistent Loki. This one is not very bounce centric. This one is definitely focused on using Loki to its finest. It's running Kitty. A lot of people have taken out Kitty in these type of decks, but they're still running Kitty. They're running the werewolf, right? Because Kitty doesn't work with werewolf. Is the kind of criteria. Like that's why it's not that popular. Because if you're playing werewolf, which a lot of people seem to think is like the better version, then you don't really want to add the Kitty because it's not an on reveal. So that's kind of why it's lost from priority in this deck for sure. But still works, right? Still works fine, especially with Elsa Bloodstone, right? I think you have to be running Elsa Bloodstone if you're running Kitty. It's funny because I can see the second Kitty list down there. They're running Kitty with no Elsa, but they are running Angela, I guess. But still like just contradicting exactly what I'm saying. So you can do whatever you want. Basically, is what I'm looking at here. But definitely a solid list. I think all the Loki lists are going to be pretty good. So not too surprising there. Next up, we have the Undivined deck lists, whatever that means. So first off, once again, another Thanos control. This one is running Spectrum instead. So definitely cool. We're not going to like go through all 100 lists, right? Maybe we'll speed through it, but definitely fair list here. Nothing too surprising. You could see that a lot of people are running Super Scroll for Miss Marvel. So this is like the learnings from playing in ladder and stuff like that. The Super Scroll, a very good answer into Miss Marvel. A lot of people are playing Miss Marvel Onslaught. You can see there wasn't that much of that particular list in this tournament because like Super Scroll can really just solo that deck by itself if you're in the right scenario. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. And then left, we have another Loki deck. This is the most popular deck being brought. This one isn't using Werewolf at all. This one isn't using Elsa Bloodstone at all. So it's pretty focused on the Loki matchups or the Loki engine. So you just have to be aware of that. And then the third one is a Dark Hawk with Doom, which is pretty cool. I think that's not a bad like deck list to play. Ooh, you know what I could do? Yeah, let me do this. I bet I could definitely make it bigger. That's better, right? I have no like feedback, since I'm recording. But I think that's a little bit bigger, a little bit better. So I'll leave it like that. All right, next up, we've got Sandman, a Sandman deck. So just Electro Sandman. I was considering bringing a deck like this to the tournament personally. I just didn't. I didn't love it. Like I just didn't love how it felt like it played out. I felt like a lot of people could still compete. Like the Sandman necessarily wasn't always doing that much in my opinion, so it was a little bit awkward. But was still fine. But yeah, definitely a deck I considered bringing. So at least might do well. And then second off, we have Patriot. So just a pretty interesting Patriot list. This is actually somewhat similar to the Patriot list I brought. This one is a little bit more. It's a little bit more combo centric because they're running Dazzler, Elsa, Bloodstone, but they're not running anything to kind of fully upgrade the Dazzler. So they have to hope that the Dazzler just kind of works on the 2 lanes they need. So you're getting like a 3/6 or so, which is not bad. It's just something you have to be aware of. So definitely interesting, right? Valkyrie is something your opponent, like if you're playing into that deck, you have to be aware of, like the Valkyrie coming to shut you down. But generally, a solid list. I have something kind of very similar, so pretty cool. Third one we have is just a Shuri deck. Shuri is just a solid list. If you can beat it or not, like that's how it goes, right? You either can and it's good, or you can't and it's bad. So definitely just a solid list. A lot of people have experience playing Shuri, so it's almost like a comfort pick. So not surprising to see some Shuri in the tournament. Next up, we have, what is this? This is a Miss Marvel control deck. It's using Negasonic, which I love, and a lot of like little tech cards. It's going wave into what? Wave into Professor X, I guess, or I guess you can go wave into Goliath. I'm guessing wave into Professor X. I'm just seeing like this isn't a common deck, so I'm just trying to see the game plan here. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. I don't want to fight this deck, right? This is like a deck that I don't actually know like what the full game plan is. I mean, I could see the generic game plan, right? You can go Miss Marvel, Iron Man, Miss Marvel, Professor X, right? And then Goliath, the third lane. So it's not bad, but there's definitely some tricks that I probably don't know, especially with like Psylocke. They're running Psylocke, right? Probably to shoot out some 5s or whatever. So there's definitely some strategies in there that I'm not aware of. So those are the type of decks where I don't know if I necessarily want to face because I'm not sure what their full plan is. And then we have High Evolutionary with Leech, which I think is pretty good. So a very solid list in here right now. A lot of people are not really running counters to Leech, right? So you could definitely do a lot of work with that. And I don't want to cure cancer. Oh, right. They have names. That's funny. They're just playing Shuri. If that's fair, why can't I cure cancer when you can just play Shuri? Just solid, simple. It makes sense. I get it for sure. Then next up, we have another low-key list. This isn't super surprising. This one is definitely more heavy on the bounce engine. So they're running the Beast, they're running the Loki, they're running the Werewolf. So just very solid bounce. Then also we have another High Evolution deck, which is fair. And then the last one is a Thanos control. This one has some tech cards, particularly Magneto, right? Magneto being able to deal with the Miss Marvel, so I think that's pretty cool adaptation to some of the meta stuff. I don't think Magneto had such high presence before. Next up, we have Patriot Control. So this is just a pretty solid Patriot list using an Absorbing Man. So some tech people were doing is with Invisible Woman, which they're not running, where you could go Invisible Woman into Absorbing Man and play Doctor Doom, and then the last turn, the Absorbing Man would pop off and play the Doctor Doom bots again. But they're not doing anything like that, so this is just a little bit more standard, where you're following up Absorbing Man with either Mr. Sinister or I guess Girl or I guess Nico. It really depends, right? So it's like it's not super clear what the Absorbing Man is supposed to be doing here, but obviously it's the matchups you'll be able to see. And then second off, we have just Junk. It's just a Junk deck. I think Junk is pretty good right now, as long as you have the right curve, and especially if you're not fighting Destroyer, which you're not fighting Destroyer that much here. So Junk probably has a lot of good matchups, and just a solid annoying deck to deal with if you like that kind of thing. And then next up we have Cerebro 3, right? That's Cerebro 3. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I generally think the power of Cerebro 3 is with all the tech cards you get to play. However, they're not using that much tech. They are using Killmonger and Valkyrie. But other than that, I guess Luke Cage is a tech card, but it's not a tech in Cerebro, so makes sense. But yeah, definitely an interesting, solid list. This one is maybe the one I would jump into the matchups with, but knowing if you know exactly what you're going to be playing into, right, you can kind of see it. I do think best case scenario, you want decks that can that have easy matchups, you know what I mean, so that you can say, oh, I'll ban the hard matchup and then I have 2 easy matchups with this deck, right? That kind of thing. I just think that's a lot. That's a lot to plan, especially since you can't repeat cards, to kind of have 3 different decks that win into multiple matchups very flexibly, but it's doable for sure. And we are going slow, so maybe I need to speed things up. Next up, we have Thanos. We've talked about this before, just using ongoing stuff, but having both Valkyrie Spectrum. And then we have Negative Surfer. So this is our low negative player. Let's take a look at it. They are running Bast Negative, which I think is super fair. They're not running Ravonna. They're running Psylocke still, so no Ravonna things in there. Zabu, Ironheart, Mystique, Wolfsbane. Seems like a regular Mr. Negative deck. This is the more consistent version since they're running Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer Negative is usually what I'd regard as the more consistent version, so could definitely make it work, right? And there's definitely some power plays to be made. Negative Iron Man is still super strong, so seems playable. It's not popular, but seems playable as long as you get your pieces. The only scary part is if you don't get what you want and your opponent punishes you. They see you don't hit anything on 4 and they snap, or you don't hit anything, and then you just have to leave, right? So those are the scary moments. And then we have this discard deck. Strong Guy discard. Actually bringing Strong Guy discard. So there wasn't that much discard at all. And even with the discard, I don't think that many people navigated to Strong Guy. I will say, with this particular version, they're running both Strong Guy and Dakin for their 3 and Lady Civ. So it's pretty heavy, and you are super reliant on MODOK. So usually Hellcow would be in here instead of Strong Guy, and Hellcow would kind of give you another way of dealing with the win condition, even though it's a much weaker version than the MODOK. So here you're giving up on that. You're saying, okay, if we don't have it, I don't care. We're just going to go full Strong Guy engine. So definitely respectable. I think this card is surprisingly good. So could definitely do work for him. Next up, we have Life Equals RNG. So this is just who brought this? This is just a Loki deck, but with more discovery. That's really all it is, right? Loki deck with more discovery. Nothing wrong with that. And then you get the Loki at the end. So yeah, solid list. Next up we have a Dirty Thanos. So just a Thanos deck. Running Echo though. Running Daredevil. So just a little bit, this looks a little bit more normal. Like nothing unique in this too much. Maybe Elsa, but even that is not that crazy, especially if you're running things like Jeff and Vision. So just a very simple Thanos list, which seems fine. And then a Miss Marvel's Mrs. Marvel's deck with Onslaught. Yeah. I do wonder how that Onslaught deck is going to go. And he is going full heavy, right, with the Super Scroll as well. So he's going Super Scroll, Miss Marvel, Claw, Onslaught type lines just to see. So a lot of heavy Miss Marvel scenario. We'll have to see how good that ends up being. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. And then next up we have Destroy. So another Destroy. Not that many Destroy decks out in the game, but definitely a solid one. This one does run Death. This one does run Null. No Armanzola. Also another Lady Deathstrike in here. Another non Deadpool deck, right? I don't play a lot of Destroy, but I would have assumed that Deadpool would have been a popular choice, but it looks like it's just not. I mean, it does have some weaknesses, right? It can get Shang-Chi, it can get Shadow King is also pretty bad, and Killmonger itself, right, is also pretty bad. But generally, I don't think there's that much of those answers, so surprised to see a lack of Deadpool. Then another Marvel, another one. Another person playing Onslaught Miss Marvels. It's almost like a carbon copy. No, it's actually quite different. Actually, no, yeah. The bottom lane, his heavy cards is very similar, but his cheap cards are very different. So, very different Miss Marvel's decks, but it seems to be a popular thing to plan. And then High Evolution. Next up, we have Sarah Bounce. It's our first Sarah deck, I think. They're also running Mobius, which is nice. So there are some people playing Mobius. Just a generic Sarah control. No Enchantress though. No ongoing hate, right? So that's actually kind of weird in this meta to have no ongoing adjustments in a control deck. No Enchantress or Rogue. So that's like I would say a clear weakness in this list currently. That I'd be afraid to kind of like bring out if you're fighting those Miss Marvel deck, like how do you beat that, right, with this list? I don't really see how you'd beat a Miss Marvel's deck. So that would be my issue with this deck at all. Um Next up we have the High Evolutionary, which is fine. Just a very standard High Evolutionary list. And then third list is a Wong. It's a Wong deck. Wong, Black Panther, Zola, Odin deck. Yeah, I mean, hopefully your opponent's not playing Cosmo or anything like that, but definitely a fun deck. This is usually the type of deck that falters in ladder, like at high ranks, because people know exactly how how your decks are going to play. However, if people are not running Cosmo, which I assume they're not, like this could just be their killer. Right? Something interesting is like even though you might judge one of their decks harshly, you never have to play it, right? Like you never have to play that deck. So it's like, oh, okay. I might not like this deck, but then I'll just play my other two decks the rest of the whole tournament and it's fine. So definitely an interesting decision here. Next up we have my list. Oh, right. So I brought discard, I brought my own Patriot list, and I also brought Loki bounce essentially. So I would discard, right? I was playing this all yesterday. Just I think it's solid. It's not like a crazy high roll deck, but it's just like a solid list with good cards that can put a lot of power down. Like I do think if I play it, it's gonna be slow. There's gonna be slow grindy games because it's gonna be difficult to win the full round, but you can still just grind them out. So I think it's generally fine. Next up, we have a Patriot deck. So this is not a list I've seen anyone play. It's my own thing. I will say the Goose is an adjustment. Normally I was playing Jeff, but the Goose is in there because of Miss Marvel. You can just put Goose in the middle lane, right? And it just kind of stops that. And there's not too much big stuff in this deck that it's fine. You can kind of get under it, so it's not too big of a deal. And just like I just have Eliath as like a threat to consider, which is good in my opinion. And it also works because now Bass doesn't mess with it. Because initially it was a 6-5, my Bass would turn to a 6-3, and I'd always be like, ugh. Now I don't care. It's a 6-3. But yeah, definitely something to be considered. And then my last list, I actually messed up and I have to resubmit it. That's why it's number 4 instead of 3, if someone was wondering. But I was running Chavez in 2 decks. But this one is just a little bit heavy bounce. I like the Dino though. I think Dino just gives you another way of putting out big power, especially with this particular version. There's a lot of ways to draw cards. So having some form of way to capitalize on that card draw, if you're not going to go full Loki, is, I think, fairly good. So that's kind of the idea there. And then Werewolf is just like a lot of power. That's also hard to know exactly where it's going to end up. So seems like a solid list. I also have Mobius in the Loki list, just because like you can get away with it, and it sometimes is good in the mirrors. Like if they're trying to like low-key turn 5, right, the Mobius is kind of like making it not great, right? Because sometimes they could take your Mobius, but turn 6 it doesn't matter. So and you don't have to play it. There's so much card draw that you don't need to be playing Mobius. So just generally pretty good in my opinion. All right, next up we have High Evo. We've seen a lot of these High Evo decks. They are running Goose, which is a little bit different. They're also running Doctor Strange, which is also a little bit different. I do wonder how their Strange is coming out to do, because a lot of times you're playing your She-Hulk Infinite on 7. I guess you can play Hulk on 6 and then move on 7. Yeah, that is weird. I do wonder how the She-Hulk is functioning here, but we'll have to see, or so. Next up, Stature Darkhawk. Solid list, pretty normal, I would say. Just have to be aware of some of the issues, but generally a fine list. And then they're also playing Discard. Okay, another Discard lover. I think this looks like oh no, it's almost my list, but well, not mine. It's almost a regular Discard list, but it's running Echo instead of instead of something else, kind of to deal with the Miss Marvel matchup, right? So this is just like, hey, I want to deal with the Miss Marvel matchup. We're gonna put Echo in the middle lane, like that's our tech card. So generally fine, instead of Wolverine or anything like that. I think that's fine. Next up, we have Galactus. So we have some Galactus players, right? I think we've seen 2 so far. I'm not a fan, but we'll see. Next up, we have Odin. So another. No, this is not an Odin deck. It's called Odin, but it's a junk deck. Okay, with some interesting tech pieces like Hazmat, and stuff like that. But it's essentially a junk deck, which is fair. And then we have a Shuri list. So some normal lists, right? I would say. Well, the junk deck is pretty unique. I'll give him that. And then the Shuri Galactus decks are pretty. They make sense for the meta. So solid. Next up is Shuri Soran. I mean, we see a lot of Shuri Soran. We see a lot of Loki, right? So they're not too different. Only one in the middle is the Darkhawk. I think this list is like the most standard list you're gonna see. Like the most standard archetypes. Shuri Soran, Miss Marvel, low key, right? I think those are the standards you can get through. Yeah, but nothing too crazy, in my opinion, from any of this. Just looking through, yeah, nothing that surprised me in that one. Next up, we have an armor Loki, right? Armor to kind of protect the collector and the Quinjet, and then just the regular. Everything else is pretty standard. Okay, and then we have a Patriot list. All the Patriot lists are really not that patrioty. This is a Silver Surfer Patriot, which is kind of like the old standard where you'd go Mr. Sinister, Brood, Absorbing Man. So Forge, Brood, Absorbing Man. So we've got the old Forge, Brood, Absorbing Man combo back, which is fine. I do wonder how that's gonna play out in this meta. But yeah, definitely an interesting list. And the third list is a control list with Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Rogue, Shadow King, Killmonger. Yeah, just all the control tools. I like those type of decks, to be fair. So I wonder how it's gonna perform. Next up, we have Shuri Sauron with a twist. The twisted Orca. If you're wondering, I will say the Sauron doesn't work that well with Orca, right? So that's the one low caveat. But if you don't hit Sauron, then Shuri into Red's going to Orca is like super fine, or Taskmaster is super fine. So definitely a fine list. Orca being interesting. And then we have Miss Marvel lockdown. So the new kind of lockdown list gets to run Medusa, and everything else is a little bit stock standard here. Gamora, I guess, is interesting, but he's running Daredevil, so it makes sense to run Daredevil. It is interesting because Daredevil is bugged right now, so kind of weird to be fully diving on that, because hopefully it works. And then we have a nice list, right? Thor, Jane Foster. I run a list like this. They're running Lockjaw instead of just generic, and they're running high evolutionary. So the Wasp makes sense, and then the Thor, the Hulk makes some sense. So kind of an old lockdown list, but with new tech cards, Werewolf being in there, and others. So I've actually not seen this exact list being played, so I do wonder how it's gonna go. And then once again, another Loki list. This one running Green Goblin just for some uniqueness. And everything else, I think we're starting to see a lot of similarities within the lists. There's nothing too crazy. I think now we're going to just go through the rest of it and see if we can find anything different. So now we're just going to go through and see the different archetypes, see the different lists that everyone brought. So first one, here we go. We have a Living Tribunal list. So it's Ravonna Living Tribunal. Definitely a very, very different build here. No Hela, right? A lot of times Hela Tribunal is the combo, but they're running Miss Marvel Living Tribunal. I actually fought a deck like this yesterday. It was okay. So I could definitely see the idea. I do think it can be telegraphed, which is like the issue, but as long as your opponent is like, not fully counting, right? Because sometimes, I think the strength is like a lot of people don't know exactly how much power you're going to have. Where if you've played this deck a lot, how much power you're going to have on all the lanes, where sometimes your opponent might miscalculate or so. And then we have and then this is another interesting list. This person is bringing interesting stuff. So he's running Lady Civ Ghost Rider, which I think is a nice little combo. He's doing it for Hela Carrier though, kind of to buff up his collector. So it's a Loki list, but kind of a twist on the traditional Loki list. So kind of cool. And then the third list is a Thanos control list, which is pretty common. We have Lockjaw or Dracula Jaw. This is a Lockjaw Infinite list, high evolutionary Lockjaw. So kind of a standard high evolutionary list. This used to dominate the tournaments, but people stopped bringing it. But looks like someone wants to try bringing it back. And we have a move deck. Is it a move deck? I see the Heimdall, and I think it's a move. Is it a move deck? It's not really a move deck. No, it just has Heimdall as your twist. Okay. It's Eliath Heimdall. It's not a move deck. Okay. It's an interesting list, though. Kind of a psych the player out deck, because you can go Heimdall final turn with Werewolf, have it move to there. So you can actually have a pretty powerful last, like, right side with the Werewolf, which is definitely unique. And then the last list is just an ongoing Miss Marvel Spectrum list, which is fair. Next up, we've got Zabu list with Crossbones. Even though Crossbones didn't get buffed, seems some people are still playing with it. Ghost Rider, Lady Sif Ghost Rider still combo. Seems solid, especially with the lack of Shang-Chi's people are running. Then you have a Spectrum list, and we have once again Forge, Absorbing Man, Brood list. Seems normal. Now we're starting to see more Lockjaw Hella, or well, not Lockjaw Hella, but Lockjaw, High Evolutionary Lockjaw, and still some very normal stuff. We have another Galactus here. So I do have to be aware of all these Galactus players. This person is doing something interesting. They're running the Claw with the Galactus. I mean, it can work for sure. But usually they're going to ramp. So you can go like Electro into Claw into Galactus, or Electro into Hobgoblin into Galactus. Things like that. And then you can follow it up with Eliath or Daredevil, whatever you need. So very solid. Then we have more Galactus. Wow. Okay. Wow. There's a lot of Galactus. You would think that people wouldn't be playing Galactus after the nerfs, and as it also can be very telegraphed, but it seems people are still interested in playing Galactus. And then we have Silky Smooth, and then we have Hulk. Seems solid. Then we have Lamby's decks. Definitely something you want to take a look at here. Loki makes sense. Very solid Loki list. I'd say Forge is the only like difference that some people might not have. Then they're also playing High Evolution, they're playing High Evolutionary. Just a very standard High Evolutionary with Echo. Echo being the tech card that people are running to kind of deal with Miss Marvel. And then they're running Thanos. Lamby playing Thanos, not surprising here. Just a Lockjaw Thanos with Magneto as the tech. So looks like almost everything can deal with Miss Marvel except for maybe the Loki version. But Loki deals with Miss Marvel by playing multiple copies of it. And then we have another Miss Marvel with Negasonic. I do love to see that. So pretty cool list. Not too crazy apart from that. They're playing Iceman, which sometimes people don't love. People play Nebula and stuff like that. But looks like they didn't want to play Nebula at all. Then we have Ramp, just a classic Ramp. Not playing Miss Marvel Ramp, which is the standard right now. They're playing just generic White Tiger Doom Odin Ramp, which I like. I actually think might be better. I don't know if that's true, but I definitely think there's some appeal. There's some reasons to just go Doom Odin when people are not doing that. And then we have a move deck. Oh, well, it's a Phoenix Force move deck, which I think is decent. And I like that they're not adding like 4 different ways to win. So sometimes when I see this deck, they're also running Shuri, they're also running Nimrod, and they just have so many like different pieces, and they hope one of them is good. But here it looks like they're fully committing to the multiple man Phoenix Force, move it around. You know, they're not even doing what's that one card? The Human Torch. They're just fully committing to the multiple man. So the one caveat with this is that if they don't draw correctly, then you can snap into it pretty easily. But other than that, it should be fine. Another Shuri deck, another Darkhawk list, another Loki list. All right, I hear you. Let's move. Let's move on. Oh man, fair enough. I mean, nothing unique. And then another Loki list, of course, and then another Miss Marvel Lockdown, of course. And then they do have Hella Tribuno. So Don't interact with me. I'm memeing. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I mean, definitely could work out if your opponent isn't running any Cosmos, right? So, um, or anything unique. So that could be a pretty powerful deck to run if you know your opponent isn't running any Cosmos and stuff like that. As long as you curve correctly, which should be easy since you're running Crystal and Magic, and actually might be a pretty solid choice to play into. So can definitely see the rationale there. That's gonna be a pretty interesting decision making. Like I actually think this could be like a disgusting deck, since a lot of people are not running Cosmo or anything to kind of interact with their game plan. So you could just like do your combo and they have no answers, right? Especially once you know what they're running. So that could actually be a very powerful deck to play in this tournament. We'll have to see. Next up, we've got the Shuri list. We've got a Patriot list. And we have a regular ramp list. Okay. Nothing too crazy. Nothing jumps out in any of the lists that are unique. Next up, we have just a Zabu Darkhawk deck with the Miss Marvel edition. And we have, a Hela deck. Wow, we have a straight Lockjaw Hela list, which is pretty cool. They're running Silver Samurai as another addition, even though they have not that much targets. I guess their targets would be Jubilee and White Tiger, which are fine targets to be fair, so not horrible. And then lastly, they just have a Thanos build with Negasonic, so that one isn't too crazy. Next up, they have She Naughty. Okay. That's funny. Just a high evolutionary deck. Then we have Destroy, and then they have Miss Marvel lockdown list as well. Okay. I like the list. Finally, we have a Destroy playing Deadpool, which I felt like there's a lack of Destroys playing Deadpool, so definitely interested to see how this one performs. And then not lastly, we have Move. Is a silky smooth move, but still move. A lot of move pieces. I would say this is a move deck. Honestly, this is a move deck for sure. Well, so we have a move deck player. We've got what is the second list? Wasp, Nico, Enchanters. Oh, it's Patriot. Okay, I didn't see the Patriot. Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is the Patriot with the Absorbing Man tech. So you can go Invisible Woman, Absorbing Man, or Doctor Doom. I didn't see the Patriot there, and the Leech is also a nice little tech. And then we have Darkhawk. I'm assuming no, this is a bounce Loki. Yeah, it's a bounce Loki. Okay, fair enough. With Darkhawk, of course, but it's more bounce Loki than Darkhawk. Then we have Shuri. We've got another Hela Tribunal. Wow. Okay, and then we have another Destroy with Dark Deadpool. And we have Bounce. We've got Ravonna deck. No Hobgoblins, just straight Ravonna with Iron Man. The Ravonna doesn't hit that many targets. I guess it hits Patriot, Mystique, Iron Man, those three. I guess that can be enough to warrant it, so we'll have to see how that does, and then our classic Shuri list. Then we have this Control Sarah with lots of tech. Decent amount of tech, Rogue, Shadow King, Luke Cage, Killmonger, Mobius, and Shang-Chi, and Enchantress. Okay. Yeah, a lot of tech in there. And then we have Miss Marvel, Classic. I say Classic, it's been out for like 2 days. And then we have Hela Tribunal. So quite a lot of people are going for this Hela Tribunal. Hope that the opponent has no interactions strategy, which I think is a pretty decent strategy to do on this. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Then we have Destroy. We've got someone using different skins to make it somewhat unclear what they're running. This is a Zabu Miss Marvel deck with Rescue and Jessica Jones. So very heavy on the 4-drops to kind of give you that way of interacting in the final turns with a werewolf on 3. And I assume all of his cards are on reveal except for Miss Marvel and Zabu. Yeah, so pretty solid list, honestly. Definitely a unique one, so we'll have to see how that performs. And then a Loki list with Green Goblin. Yeah, with Green Goblin, yeah. So seems solid. Solid Loki list with Green Goblin. Then next up, we just have some Miss Marvel Control, pretty standard. Thanos Control, pretty standard. And Loki, Bounce Loki, pretty standard as well. With Elektra, though. So that's the tech. The Elektra tech and bounce to kill all the 1-drops. Definitely, and he's running Mobius as well, so this is for the mirror, essentially. They have this to kind of deal with the mirror matchup. Pretty interesting. All right, and then next up we have the High Evolutionary Lockjaw. Not Lockjaw, High Evolutionary. Just regular High Evolutionary. Okay. Then we have Thanos Control, which is pretty popular with the Echo Tech. And then we have Silky Smooth. So this is a classic Silky Smooth. Running Juggernaut, though, which not a lot of people are running Silky Smooth. So we'll have to see how powerful that ends up being. And then we have the Jane Foster Thor list. Not running Wasp instead, just running Yellow Jacket, no Wasp. That's definitely different. But they get to run Mysterio, which is pretty cool. And then they're running a classic move. Well, it is a move. It is a move deck. It is a move deck. It doesn't have. The weird part is it doesn't have any of the traditional move engines, right? Because usually if you're playing move, you're running either multiple man, you're running Vulture, you're running Human Torch, you're running any of those combos, but he's running none of that. He's really just running Craven. So this is definitely more of a Silky Smooth deck, but there's no... Oh, there's Silk, okay. Yeah, so it's a Silky Smooth deck, but with move tech in the end, at the end, with Magneto, Heimdall Arrow. Could definitely work. And then another Miss Marvel Onslaught deck as well. Then next up, we have the ramp. It's a Lockjaw with... It's not a ramp. I guess it's Lockjaw with Sandman. So it's not really a ramp deck. It's just a Lockjaw deck with Sandman tech. And then you have Wave as well. And then next up, we have the classic. I'm going to say the classic because everyone's running some version of this with Miss Marvel Onslaught. And then third is another classic, the Loki bounce. Well, it's somewhat bounce. You have Falcon as your bounce piece as well. Then last, is this the last? Yeah, the last deck finally is the Miss Marvel deck list here. Once again, a lot of people are running Onslaught Miss Marvel. Like, this is actually surprising. More than I thought I would see, but pretty interesting. And then we have the Shuri list, and then we have the Loki list. No bounce, just classic Loki with Rogue Tech. Seems Rogue Tech is definitely something they're going. So that is the list of all the decks. There has to be something interesting, but you can kind of see a lot of variety, a lot of interesting differences in there. And hopefully, if you guys want to watch, you can tune in at, when was it? 2 p.m. EST. 2 p.m. EST. So hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it's a long one, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educatedcollins, Snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel, Snap. Your skills